Well, good morning. This is going to be my classroom for the remainder of the semester. Um, what we're going to do today, first day back together, is to finish looking at the issue of racism in ways that I can share with you. And I want to do this not because I'm anything special, but because I have had the opportunity in my life to do certain things, to respond in certain ways, and I've taken advantage of them. And I want you to think about the ethics of it, of these activities, and ask yourself whether or not there's something you care about enough that you would take actions also. So I've learned that with Facebook videos I get about 10 minutes. So I'm going to go about that long, and then I'm going to stop, and then I'll do the second one to finish this first part of today's lesson. There's 2 stories today. Each of them will be in 2 parts. And I'm hoping you'll listen to them, you'll watch them, you'll think about the ethics of the situation. You'll remember a few weeks ago now I talked about 1963 and my being at the March on Washington. Well, this story is about 1985, 22 years after that experience. And in 1985 I wasn't as naive anymore about many things. I read much, and I've lived long enough to get a fuller perspective on many of my actions. I also recognize the social and political implications that my behavior will have when I choose to make a stand. This is the story about going to Washington, D.C. to the South African embassy. At that time, there was apartheid in South Africa. Companies like Pepsi and Coke were starting to take their stock out of South Africa. And the Reagan administration was getting more and more pressure from corporations to stop supporting the government. And eventually, as every day for a year and a half, people of faith went to the South African embassy to be arrested and jailed. And people went home and wrote in their newspapers and magazines and church letters about what was going on. Eventually, that kind of pressure forced the South African government to stop having the 90% of blacks in that country put into slavery by the whites who were in charge. So this was a letter I wrote to my father after I went to Washington, D.C. It was published in my church magazine and in my college alumni newsletter. I went to Washington, D.C. again last month. I joined 45 other members of the Church of the Brethren at the South African Embassy to protest that government's apartheid policies. As I sang and prayed within 500 feet of the embassy, the police arrested me for stating with my body and with my soul that all men and women deserve to live their God-given lives with dignity. I was only a number to the embassy staff, and I'm but a footnote somewhere in a police blotter. What was important to me that day, and is important for me today, is knowing that I had the opportunity to stand up for something I believed in, and I took advantage of that opportunity. 130 people of many faiths walked and sang and prayed that April day on the public sidewalk close to the embassy. While the press recorded our actions on film, 39 of us were arrested. We were walked from the embassy sidewalk and to the paddy wagon, frisk, handcuffs, and here are the handcuffs that were used. This strap is pulled tight into your wrists. They're not metal anymore necessarily. They're these plastic things. We were handcuffed and packed on benches inside that paddy wagon for the ride to the 2nd Precinct headquarters. My handcuff strap was pulled tightly into my wrist, and somehow it was important to me to experience some pain. I wondered how many brethren would understand my attempt to be faithful to the call of Christ to love one's neighbor if they saw me, brethren leaders, and other lay people packed with our newfound non-brethren friends like sardines in a police paddy wagon. I wonder how the black policemen who arrested us felt. Some teased us about our actions and our involvement with white-collar crime. Did these African-American policemen realize, I wonder, that our actions were as much a statement of concern and a hope for a better tomorrow for them as for their black brothers and sisters in South Africa. I found it difficult to feel the severity of the situation in a new, tidy, orderly police precinct building. The structure and the tone inside was nothing like the television show Hill Street Blues. I sat by myself, deep in thought, waiting for my name to be called. I wondered about this method of being faithful. Allowing myself to be led like a sheep through pre-planned activities culminating in arrest and arraignment. Our processing included fingerprinting, posting of a $50 bond, and answering questions about ourselves. Lawyers volunteering to provide assistance to the people of faith being arrested daily at the South African Embassy were available to talk with us following our processing. The people who were at the South African Embassy that day were part of a string of people over a year and a half brought to Washington, D.C. by an organization called Trans-Africa to be arrested. After praying on the public sidewalk at the South African Embassy, we were asked to go home and to write, to put into our own words how we felt about the brutality and the slavery that blacks in South Africa were experiencing, and to argue against this type of treatment of any people in the world. And that's what we did. And now I'm going to shut this off, and you'll have to go to the second video.